So if I can, in the first instance, introduce our two speakers today, our guest experts on the topic of HS2 and leveling up. We have Professor Clive Roberts from the University of Birmingham. He is head of the School of Engineering there, director of the Birmingham Centre for Railway Research and Education, and lead for the UK Railway Research and Innovation Network. And he has a long history of working on with the railway industry and in Britain and overseas. The UK Railway Research and Innovation Network is a 92 million academia industry collaboration that is been working on kind of the future of the rail sector and what it's and how to improve it, and data monitoring, operations, all of that sort of thing. And we also have Richard Walker, who has recently been finishing up as a research fellow visiting at Leeds from the Department for Transport, which is his main employer. And at the University of Leeds, he was working on projects involved in things like the Northern Powerhouse Rail, Transport for the North, that side of things, and North of England transport strategy. He also has a history of working in consultancy, working for the Greater London Authority, the Strategic Rail Authority, before he went to the Department for Transport, and he's also a former chair of the Transport Planning Society. So we didn't actually check who wanted to go first in terms of giving their talks, but basically the order of the session will be that they'll each kind of share their expertise with us and their thoughts on the topic. And I've already got a few questions that I've been thinking about, and we'll open it up to wider questions as well.
I'm happy to go first, Hannah.
Yeah, you're happy to go first. Great. So thank you very much. And I should probably have at the beginning welcomed everyone to the Transport Studies Unit seminar. I'm one of the Transport Studies Unit researchers. And yeah, I'll turn it over to Richard if you want to share a screen, and we'll hope that that works.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I wish I was in Oxford physically. I'm actually an Oxford geographer. Now I've got a bit of echo. I hope that will go away.
If anyone is not muted, please try and mute yourself.
Okay, hang on. I'm going to try again and share again. Hang on. We tried this earlier and got it right eventually. Yeah. Okay, how does that look, everyone?
Yeah, that looks good.
Okay, so hi everyone. I'm going to leveling up on the role of high-speed rail. So yeah, I'm doing this talk with my Institute of Transport Study Leeds hat on. But it's a lot of stuff that I did as a civil servant working on Northern Transport Strategy and things. It's the first time I've done it, so you'll forgive me if I make any mistakes. What I'm trying to cover in 10 minutes is the role of rail in leveling up, or regional spatial development, or regional rebalancing, or addressing social and regional inequalities. So it's not really about rail, it's about the leveling up situation. And hopefully that'll dovetail with what Clive says about railways. So the thing I'm going to try and cover is the leveling up white paper, what I call the regional economic success recipe, the orthodox recipe, and a quick look at glimpse at unorthodox recipes, the role of rail in getting a place offer right. And if I've not been kicked off for overrunning my time, I'll have a couple of quick thoughts on the integrated rail plan just published and the lasting effects of COVID. So it's a bit ambitious. We'll see how well I do. I'm not really going to talk about the leveling up white paper, but it's definitely, if you've not yet looked at it or read it and you're interested in the the British regional development scene. It's pretty much essential reading. It's it's very long. It's got 297 pages, 91 maps, and figures, including the famous figure one, which table one, which was ripped off from Wikipedia, apparently, of the 48 largest cities in the world since 7000 BC. It's quite a sort of academic tome for a government document, and it's worth definitely worth having a look at. And you don't have to agree with all of it to think that you can see where the government's thinking is going. It's got 6 capitals, social capital, physical capital, intangible capital, all this kind of thing. And then 5 pillars for policy, which cover 4 policy focus areas covering 11 missions. And I would use up all my 10 minutes if I was going to talk about any of those. So I'm going to pick up at the one thing it picks up is something called the Medici effect, a creative and commercial critical mass developing through the clustering of people, business, finance, and culture. And that's the thing that they're aiming for all of the UK, so that we can enter sort of Renaissance and golden era like 15th century Florence. What I'm going to talk about more quickly is I mean, this is nothing's new in levelling up. And the thing that the levelling up paper that drove the design of HS2 was what was called the Higgins Report back in 2014, Rebalancing Britain. Sir David Higgins was the chair of HS2 Limited, and he boiled down the problem or the challenge that the North Midlands have too few of the best companies, and they don't have enough company headquarters. The regions as a whole have too few jobs and too few good jobs, or jobs that pay high salaries. And they're the bit they've experienced a brain drain of the 25 to 55 age group, and there's a lack of strong regionally based institutions. So that's the kind of I think somebody needs to go on mute if that's all right, because I'm getting an echo of myself. Okay, so here's a quick diagram to kind of summarize the challenge as set out by the Higgins Report. We've got, if you look on the left-hand side, there are too few opportunities for graduates to establish and develop their career in the North or the West Midlands, for that matter. And therefore, there's a lack of credibility for top employers to go and locate in that region. And you've got to flip out of the vicious circle and turn it into a virtuous circle. Now, this is a very complicated slide, and I won't have time to go into all of it. But my observation, having worked in this sphere for quite a long time, is that some people come at it from what I call the agglomeration approach, and some people come at the regional economic success recipe from the smart specialization approach. And to give a very quick summary of both, I think somebody still needs to go on mute, I just mentioned. So I'll just mention that. Yeah, so the agglomeration approach is this concept that if you build a big agglomeration, then productivity will go up, and you'll be more prosperous. And this is the so-called matching, learning, and sharing advantage of having a large number of people in one place. It's not specialized, it's just a cluster of clusters. And this is the key advocates of this kind of approach are people like Henry Overman at the LSE and Bridget Rosewell. And this is about if you provide a big accessibility, a big labour market, access to clients, access to markets, then things will happen. And you've got to be quite big, over 5 million big to deliver that. The other approach, smart specialisation, is advocates people like Philip McCann at Sheffield, which is you've got to be world class in a specialised field and do more of what you're good at, and get your exporting companies right, and your prosperous region will follow. And the advocates of that, the exemplars of that, places like Copenhagen or Stuttgart, which are not very big places, but do extremely well. Before I talk more about that, what I might call orthodox approaches to regional success, I did want to just say, you know, there is an unorthodox strand of thought that, you know, growth is actually a sort of obsolete economic orthodoxy. And what, so the diagram on the left is the Ptolemaic conception of the solar system with the Earth at the center. And as the sort of Vatican astronomers got more and more information that the planets weren't moving quite as they were, they kept adjusting this model of how the world is, or how the solar system is, by adding epicycles to the model of the sun revolving around the Earth. When what they really need to do is throw out the model that they were using to visualize the whole thing. And that's I think a question at least worth posing with respect to economic growth, given the climate crisis and the kind of economic or social dimension of the economic crisis, whereby we've got increasing inequality. So I've put up what's called the donut diagram, which I hope will be familiar to a lot of you. That's put forward by Oxford University, actually, School of Geography, it's sort of saying, look, let's have a totally new way at how we look at delivering a regional economy that gives people what they want, and a world economy that stays within ecological limits and gives everybody a decent lifestyle, but not a lavish one. So I just want to throw that out. The two interesting contributors in that sphere in the north of England is the Foundational Economy Group at Manchester University, who talked about a different way of conceiving of regional economic success. And the guy who's trying to do it on the ground is a guy called Matthew Brown, who's the leader of Preston Council in Lancashire, and he's there's a thing called the Preston model of community wealth building. And so that was a digression, just to talk about sort of different models of regional economic success. But I'm going to return to the agglomeration vision of regional economic success and rail's role in it. So this diagram, which again I won't go through in great detail, but it's basically saying if the West Midlands and the North can have better access to each other, better access to the world city of London, and better connectivity to the major airports so they can reach world markets, primarily Heathrow, then you're going to create that virtuous circle that will grow the kind of grow the productivity per head of the economy. So with that in mind, I was just going to put out this diagram, which is HS2 and Northern Powerhouse Rail as it was conceived of going into the integrated rail plan review of what was affordable. And the vision was, I've just written this down, a super connected network of cosmopolitan but affordable cities with high levels of accessibility to a premier world city, i.e. London. And only rail can, and one way of summarizing that would be the Medici effect. You've got everything, the cultural sort of, the accessibility basis for this sort of Medici effect. And railways, so just to kind of explain that diagram, the red is HS2, Y, it was originally conceived, service pattern at least, if not new infrastructure, and the purple is Northern Powerhouse Rail linking up the big northern conurbations. And I conceive of rail as a kind of underpinning to delivering the full Medici effect. And I wanted to just really quickly, if I've got time, just run through what I think the other aspects of a place offer you need to do that the rail accessibility needs to slot into to actually get a result. And so the concept is this place offer vision, and it says here for the Northern Powerhouse, but it could easily be the same for the Midlands Engine. It's a place where you can find your perfect job and develop your career without having to leave. A place where you can afford to buy your dream home, live the life that you want to live at each stage of your life, and find a lifestyle offer in different parts of your community, for every stage of your life. And I think where rail comes in is in the jobs side of it, the connectivity, agglomeration. Only rail can give the labour market catchment you need to get that kind of range of strength of business and talented people thing. But you also need a housing suit, which I think the North can deliver, because The housing market still functions in the north of England. You can buy a house on a regular salary, and you can move house. People aren't hoarding them. That's possibly less true than it was 3 years ago, but it's still there. And you've got to give it a good lifestyle offer, which needs attention and needs much bigger sources, amounts of money than are currently being provided under the levelling up agenda, which I think is a weakness that is understood, but no, the Treasury doesn't quite have the commitment to do anything about it yet. So I've summarised it, that kind of lifestyle offer in this diagram. A region needs to offer a great education, first job opportunities, and chance to climb the ladder without leaving. Live the dream at a price you can afford. Those are the kind of penthouse flats that you can, and lifestyles are available in Manchester these days. Then you've got, as you move through your life cycle, good schools, good properties to move into, and a chance to age well. And those pictures on the left are Bolton in Lancashire. So there are nice places to live in the north and good schools. So I can stop there if you want, Hannah, or I could just say a few extra words on the integrated rail plan. Up to you.
Yeah, 1 more minute on that then.
Yeah, okay, so I'll be super quick. So the integrated rail plan is what we're really talking about here, which is has knocked out the new build for HS2 on the eastern leg north of Trent Parkway Station, East Midlands Parkway Station, sorry, Trent Junction. And this is, you know, has this kind of bashed a hole in the whole conception? I would argue no. I think the thing that matters in terms of HS2 and the office market in the big regional cities is the relative journey time to London rather than the absolute journey time. I think when all the Manchester, Liverpool, Leeds and so on are all balanced at around 2.5 hours from London, that they all have got the same chance to fight for you know, London office market, you know, international office-based companies. But if one becomes a lot nearer to London than the others, then that might change the perspective. And I think Clive should say a few things about Birmingham in that respect. But as far as the IRP is concerned, as long as the IRP is actually better for Liverpool than was previously being proposed, because they've integrated Northern Powerhouse rail infrastructure leading into Liverpool with the HS2, so there'll be faster services to Liverpool. Derby and Nottingham will actually get trains to their city centre stations rather than the parkway on the edge of town. And depending on the East Coast Main Line upgrade, which will be the replacement for the eastern leg, Leeds, Newcastle might do as well as it was going to do under HS2. And at the moment, Leeds and Sheffield look like the losers, but the IRP actually says we're going to do quite a lot of work to work out what we can offer them instead. And my feeling is if the East Coast Main Line upgrade can come on stream early, perhaps even before HS2 phase 1 is finished, then the impact on Leeds may not be so bad. So that's my thoughts on IRP. And final one, really quick, COVID. This thing about, you know, your conception of the universe being completely wrong and needing to have to be completely recalibrated. I think we do need to consider that issue, and I won't discuss it now, but we need to discuss it. Is, you know, is the idea that people work in offices in big city centres and can only get those knowledge spillovers by being in the same place at the same time and travelling by rail in order to do so? Has that conception of the universe been completely blown apart by COVID and the move to everybody doing everything on Teams and Zoom? So I shall leave you with that question, which I hope we can discuss later. And thanks very much for listening.
Thanks very much, Richard. Really thought-provoking presentation. I was going to say that I noticed that I think somebody has already started posting in the chat. Please do add to the chat if you think of questions. We will look at them as we get to that point after Professor Clive Roberts' talk. So Clive, can we turn it over to you, please?
Thanks, Hannah. And through the wonders of telepathy, Richard and I have managed to come up with 2 complementary presentations. So I'm really pleased to be able to present to you the work that we've been doing at Birmingham, and really I'm going to talk about, I guess, three things. One is just to give you a little bit of background about me and the group I run. I'm a professor of railway systems, so I'm going to talk about railways for a bit. I'm then going to talk a bit about levelling up and the impact it can have at a moderately high level, and a little bit of focus on Birmingham. And then I'm going to talk particularly about skills and jobs. So I think that works quite nicely with what we've just heard. So as has been said, I'm Clive Roberts. I'm Professor of Railway Systems, Head of School of Engineering at the University of Birmingham. And I lead something called the Birmingham Centre for Railway Research and Education. There's about 160 researchers in my group looking at railways. We're the largest railway research group in the world outside of China and Russia. I also lead something called UCRIN, the UK Rail Research and Innovation Network, which is a large £92 million industry government-funded railway activity across the country. I've been here 25 years working in rail. I'm very close to the industry. This will come out very clearly through my presentation. I'm an engineer, but have lots of impact and interest in the social impact of railways. But very much I'm going to come at this, as you might expect an engineer to, maybe. Our group is 50 years old. In fact, we celebrated our 50th birthday on Monday, and I have about 450 students associated with the group. And we do work here in the UK, including with HS2. So we're one of two strategic partners, two strategic academic partners with HS2, but loads of things in all sorts of wonderful places around the world, all to do with railways. And we generally develop technology. So you may have seen, this is our most famous bit of work. You may have seen the UK's first hydrogen train. We developed that from initial papers here about 10 years ago through student projects, through working with industry, and then that was demonstrated at COP26. And here's another piece of work which is more relevant to the presentation today. So we're doing the engineering and operations resilience modelling for HS2. So this work is driving the understanding of how the network will perform when it becomes disturbed. And we're also doing sort of optimization of technology rollout and how that works. So this is what we would call a microscopic simulator. So down to the individual sort of relay control, it won't be relay control, but the individual digital control of the railway network. So we have got fairly unique expertise in doing this sort of thing. Right, so onto the topic in hand. Richard mentioned what I might say about Birmingham. I think this is probably the first evidence I can give you of levelling up and impact of HS2. So those pictures on the left, and they're not all of the pictures of Birmingham, they're the things that are currently being built in Birmingham that are being brought about by HS2, which are being driven by jobs, population increase, a higher standard of living in the city. So Birmingham, I would argue and observe by just looking out the window, is really getting benefit out of HS2. And what's fascinating from my point of view, and many of you might be able to explain this better than I can, but is that that's happening already. And we're seeing companies such as HSBC moving their personal banking HQ to the UK, many large international organizations moving their headquarters to Birmingham. And I would, it hasn't been said yet, I see Birmingham very much as the centre of the HS2 network, and it puts some Birmingham-centric thinking around national travel. The bit down the bottom, I'm afraid, is a bit of HS2 propaganda, but is some of it I've been feeding. So one is the point is the 1 in 5 people will be within either half an hour or an hour of HS2, and so one of the things to think about as we talk through this is there's obviously the railway itself that will be built, but actually the enabling transport links to those HS2 hubs. So for Birmingham in the centre of Birmingham and Curzon Street, but to the other key stations. So it's important to think about this as a transport system, and the connectivity onward from HS2 that then gives benefit to a wider set of population. The other point then is jobs. So there's various numbers around this, but 100,000 jobs, of which 70%, and I'll give you a bit more detailed analysis about this, 70% are created outside London. So there is potential, and it is happening, that HS2 is creating, during its build phase, high quality jobs in the regions of the UK. The challenge is making that a sustainable set of jobs so that they just don't all disappear when somebody's built HS2. So the project, as you will be more aware than most, is not about just construction of rail. We've got the improvements in productivity and connectivity between the cities and towns. I mentioned that. The improvement in living standards, so all the levelling up agendas really, in terms of higher quality jobs outside of London. In terms of making those sustainable, it's really important we think about improving our exports of railway systems and railway technology. And construction in general out of the UK. At the moment in railways, we export about 7 to 8% of the rail technology we develop here in the UK. If you compare that with France, which is 16%, Germany, which is 28%, we've got quite a long way to go. And that growth in export is going to be really important, particularly as actually we're peaking on HS2 spend, but we're also peaking on mainline spend at the moment. And they will both drop off the cliff more or less at the same time. The opportunity of spreading opportunities. I've spoken about the migration of companies and actually government offices. The Department of Transport now have an office and a migrating staff to Birmingham. So again, that moving people out of the capital. Empowerment and local impact. And we've seen this in Birmingham, and I understand in Manchester the same. Really, HS2 is acting as a catalyst for local determination of policies. I've mentioned the transport one, for example, but there's stuff on urban development, there's stuff on skills, all linked to this that is enabled a whole ripple effect across our region. And education opportunities and focusing on, in fact, I've just been on a call this morning looking at skills and education and employment as a result of HS2, looking at focusing on new ways to work, focusing on getting people into work that haven't been on long-term unemployed, on apprenticeships, on all of the things that you might expect. So I'm going to spend maybe 2 minutes now just talking about the national infrastructure, skills shortage and demand, and where it is. I'm not going to do this justice, but just give you a little bit of thinking in terms of those jobs. So I guess the key point I'm trying to give is that those jobs are real. They are beginning to happen now, but the challenge that I think we have is that we can't just bring people off the street and give them a job. We need to train them in some ways, and we've actually had a real problem in actually getting the right training in place. And the danger is that we don't have the training in time, so it's all a bit too little too late, and I'll comment on how we're working on that at the university. So this is the pipeline of infrastructure spend. I'm afraid this graph comes from a bigger report, so it's a little bit out of context, but fundamentally the takeaway message from this is the big areas where people want expertise in engineering in the near future is around energy and transport. That probably does not come as a surprise. This then is the national infrastructure construction pipeline from 2018 onwards. So through millions, and you can see that rail is really dominant in here. High-speed rail is the second largest, as a second side on the bar chart. So there's lots that's needed in that transport space. This tells us what kinds of jobs people need, so what skills are needed. You can see here both the importance and the growth demand. So the areas where we need people. And then this shows you how spend is secured and is likely to continue into the future. So it gives us some confidence that this is a sustained spend, but with a peak in about 3 years' time, which is somewhat challenging because I'm not sure we're going to have those people. So we may be wanting to create jobs. The danger is that we won't actually have the people to employ in those jobs. And then the map shows where we will need those people in the UK. So there's some really interesting stuff here about that regional spread. It's not to say that London doesn't get some of this, but it does say that a lot of this starts to occur in the north, and there is a transition in that direction. This slide, and I assume somebody will make the slides available afterwards, so if you want to look at these numbers, you can. This slide talks about the levels of skills. So if you like, the levels of jobs, level 5 being the equivalent of a foundation degree, if you're not aware of the education levels. So one of the things we're doing at the university, and I was on my earlier slide, is last year we took over the running of what's called the National College for Advanced Transportation and Infrastructure. Quite a bold and brave move, I'm realizing now, a year on. This is a national further education college with sites. You can see the size and scale of those sites in Birmingham and Doncaster, that was established in 2017, and it got into some real difficulties. Just not enough students, not the right sort of model. So we were asked by the Department for Education, given our rail capability and our rail knowledge, whether we would take this on, and somehow or other, I managed to convince our Vice Chancellor this was a good idea. So we took over these colleges and are now working to develop a whole portfolio of activities that will meet that demand I was just speaking about. So this is very much focused on vocational skills that address both the HS2 demand, but the broad demand as well. So that's a good introduction, I think, in terms of my interest, background, my take on this space. Thank you.
Right, thanks very much. We'll now move to the Q&A side of things, and I'll start things off, which relates to a question in the chat, but I'd probably put it slightly wider, which is when it's talking about leveling up and some of these agglomeration effects, and also in the second talk about kind of, you know, jobs coming and things like that. What happens to the cities and urban areas that aren't the main ones on the lines? So we're not talking about central Birmingham, central Manchester and that sort of thing, but in the chat it was mentioned in Bradford. I know there's other examples. And how far away are some of these cities before they really lose any benefits from that, because they, you know, the interchange time and all things like that. So don't know who wants to take that first.
Perhaps I can talk about that from a local Birmingham experience, and then perhaps Richard will pick up with something that's a bit more academic in terms, rather than local observation. So certainly what we're observing in Birmingham is exactly as I said, and you've reiterated, Tanner, that there is significant development in the city area, and that's generated a lot of activity, but those people are not living in the city. Those supply chains are not necessarily in the city that they're relying on. So we are seeing quite a significant ripple effect out of the city. I guess the other thing to observe, and I mentioned, is actually those transport links, again, where you consider, I'm talking engineering terms, of where you consider the system boundary. Do you consider the system boundary for HS2 in terms of levelling up the entrance to the station door, or do you see it the hinterland around the local area? And if the investment and project and demand, and that is happening certainly in our area, is to speed up journey times, provide other public transport methods into those key areas. So for example, we're having big significant tram extensions to serve HS2, then what you're doing is you're bringing that out into a broad set of areas. Now, there's from a rail point of view, there's much bigger challenges to that in the Northern Powerhouse area, in the north of Britain than there is in the West Midlands area. But that work is ongoing. So things like the links across Transpennine, etc., are really bringing down journey times. And there's some inconceivably long journey times around places like Bradford for public transport that really need looking at. But if you can convince people, and the funding can be sought to broaden the scope of the project to be that broader area, then there's an awful lot more benefit that's going to be coming.
Richard, did you want to?
Yeah, sure. I mean, this is really the #1 question, and it's such a huge question. So all of the big conurbations of the North and Midlands have got the main regional commercial centre and then surrounding secondary towns, which are really big, but were basically manufacturing towns, you know. So in West Midlands, you have Birmingham, but then you've got a Wolverhampton, Walsall, etc. In Greater Manchester, you've got Manchester, but you've also got Bolton, Bury, Rochdale, Oldham, places like that. And I mean, because the agglomeration message was that you need I mean, the point about the agglomeration theorists was that Manchester and Birmingham themselves weren't strong enough to compete on the world stage and need to be boosted up by this kind of HS2 type accessibility. But during the course of the kind of 2010s, there was a backlash because those regional centres were kind of hollowing out the surrounding towns, particularly for things like retail and leisure. I mean, manufacturing was already gone, you know, in a lot of these towns as the major employer. So those towns are really in big trouble post 2008. And so the kind of towns, there's kind of backlash, and you've got this kind of towns policy agenda, which the Conservatives rode quite well at the last, you know. I mean, a lot of people say that the economic conditions in those kind of towns is what helped to swing the Brexit vote and helped to swing the current Conservative Party majority in Parliament. So they do feel they have to do something for those left behind towns. And the levelling up agenda is an attempt to kind of be all things to all people, I suppose, and give the towns something to do. And what you'd actually do is, I mean, what I tried to show on my slide is that places like Bolton do have a lifestyle offer. You know, there are a lot of nice residential areas with relatively cheap housing, and they could fit into a kind of ecosystem around the regional centre in the same way that, you know, Buckinghamshire or places in Surrey do with respect to London. It's not beyond the realms of believability. There was a thing that people joked about, Barnsley is a Tuscan hill village, but when you go there, it could be quite nice, but it needs immense amounts of investment to deliver that place offer.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's whether or not rail in particular helps those towns and helps, you know, like where you said about the smart specialism alternative agenda and that sort of thing, or whether actually does rail continue to hollow out some of those towns.
I mean, it's such a good question because, you know, what actually hollows out those towns is a development model that says we do car-based developments, whether it's and so the town centres die because people are driving to do all their daily business. And there's a real, I think if you go down the car-based development model, you're always going to struggle to get those places back. You've got to at some point give up the car-based development model, which is very hard and very costly, because the growth pains of going out from one way of doing development to another is quite difficult. But I think decarbonisation is a big enough problem to force us to do that. And then you go back to the kind of integrated system where you have, you know, you'd have a public transport hub at the Hauptbahnhof in the middle of the city, and then all the suburbs would link into it through public transport and link to each other through orbital public transport. But it's not the way people are living their lives at the moment. It's too costly at the moment. Fares are too costly, and people are trapped in car dependency in a lot of these conurbations.
Yeah, no, thank you. There's another question in the chat, and people can also feel free to put their hands up if they want. I just wanted to follow on from that really quickly on because you brought in kind of lifestyles and that side of things, and there's kind of a link between that and actually the question in the chat and the kind of COVID implications, which is around how should the rail industry be responding in terms of things like timetabling, ticketing, you know, what are the desirable journey times if people are changing kind of how they're traveling and if it's to attract people for more than just necessarily the commute into the office, but actually so that there are these kind of ecosystems of the kind of complete package of lifestyle, culture, arts, as well as affordable homes and perhaps some of the more outer areas.
Do you want me to respond first?
Yeah, go for it, Richard.
I mean, there's a real issue that merits its own session about, you know, what COVID and changing working patterns does to the whole kind of geographical structure of our cities, you know. And there's a question in the margin about, you know, people working from home. I mean, what we did try to have a look at this at ITS. I mean, the first thing is that because COVID didn't end on time and dragged on, the long-term impacts are still kind of working through. But I think that there's a big hole in commuting, which is obviously the fare revenue. You know, it's a big cost and it's a big revenue source for the industry. So there's an issue on commuting, and if mass commuting in the morning stops happening and the load is spread more evenly over the day and over the week, then there are cost savings for industry as well as revenue losses. But I think the thing that in an HS2 discussion we need to worry about the most is whether we're going to knock a hole in business travel, which is you know, the full price tickets that prop up a very major part of the rail industry's funding model. And if you can do a meeting on Zoom and get a better outcome than you could spending 250 quid on a you know, peak return rail fare, why wouldn't you do that? And that's got to, I mean, that really punches a hole in the funding model for HS2 and indeed the raison d'etre of HS2. And I think that the thing that's going to resolve it one way or the other is whether the hybrid meeting works. So I did a bit of work for ITS talking to businesses, and if everybody's online, everybody's equal. If some people in the room and some are online, there's quite a lot of background noise still.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think somebody's not muted.
People could just mute, maybe. So
Noted
what I was going to say was, if the hybrid meeting doesn't work, and people who are doing very big business deals would rather eyeball people, then maybe business travel will come back. Because if you insist on being the only person in the meeting on Zoom and you start losing out, then the market will push people back into face-to-face. But it's too early to say.
Not got any
Thanks.
people.
Clive, do you want to add to that? And
Yeah, I will. I
People can mute themselves. That would be really
I think
helpful.
it's somebody called Steph who's the one. But anyway, in terms of where we are currently, certainly I know the figures from the West Midlands region. We're up on rail travel at about 40% of commuters have returned as pre-COVID numbers, but 90% of leisure travellers, which is really interesting in the fact that the leisure market has bounced back much more quickly, really surprisingly so. The commuter area is coming up, but it's changed its dynamic, and it's certainly not my area of expertise, and I think it's just an unknown of what will happen in that space. The challenge actually, or the interesting part around this, and Richard sort of touched on it, is that catering for that peak time, that high capacity time on railways that you have in rush hour, you know, the 7 o'clock train to London, is actually really expensive, and is one of the things that drives the cost on railways in terms of infrastructure projects. So there is potential to sort of reimagine what we can do around that if we're not designing for capacity anymore. So there's some interesting things to be done, and I think there's some interesting things to be done, and we've got some collaborations with Cambridge in this space around more inclusive passenger experience, so that what you're doing is actually enabling the railway to be used by a greater number of people. Up until COVID, we were very much focused as a sector on capacity. How do we get more trains basically through the tube at first thing in the morning, getting them into London? There's many of other places, but that was really the exam question for railways going forward. Now there is a rethinking of that, and one of the questions certainly is, how do you make, you know, if you think of just in terms of passengers' abilities to travel, the sort of numbers say about 2/3 of people in the country would consider themselves able to access rail. That doesn't mean to say they are traveling by rail, but they would feel that they could take a train. And that means there's about 1/3 of the population that feel that they can't access the railway for some other reason. So there's a lot to work to do to make that pool of potential railway users bigger, and that's very much around passenger experience and accessibility and the inclusivity of options for travellers. So some really interesting things in that space, I think, to again get more benefit out of these projects.
Thanks for that. Just to check, Karen George said something about manufacturing. Did you have a sort of more broader question on that you'd like to come on the video and ask?
I just thought that we were focusing a little bit much on commuters and the fact that manufacturing goods and people travelling who actually have to be in factory will also benefit, won't they? And transport of goods.
Can I just follow up? So yes, I think so, and you're right, Karen. We haven't touched on freight really yet, and again, the reimagining of freight is the European railways are slightly weird compared with many railways in the rest of the world, in the fact that they are passenger centric. But you know, if we go to Australia or South Africa, North America, then the railways operating as freight rails. Now, there's good reasons for that, because they have mines and big goods to move at long distance, etc. But there is a real potential. We haven't really been able to use our railways for freight because they've been full of passengers. So there is some options to think about how we use that capacity in other ways, and certainly movement of goods in various ways is an interesting area to consider, and is very green in terms of the things that we might want to do, move forward in terms of carbon reduction, etc. as well. So you know, if we've got the infrastructure there, we can use its capacity for freight in a much more effective way than we have been up until now.
And I think that she was also saying about the manufacturer, the people who work in manufacturing that make the goods, because perhaps at the moment those connections aren't there because they're not focused. They're focused on the city centers where there's been office workers, and not on where there's the factories.
And some of that is built in, obviously, to the network, and we're not going to build new lines for that, but certainly more flexible services for those sorts of things are a significant possibility.
Yeah. There was a question about, you know, because obviously in Richard's talk, he mentioned about the East Coast Main Line. One question is whether there are really justifiable benefits of the large cost of HS2 over upgrading the West Coast Main Line to run at higher speeds and frequencies, if it was kind of being said a bit that the East Coast Main Line could make up some of that.
I mean, I can perhaps, I mean, the issue that the West Coast Main Line was full was what drove the you know, the definition of the HS2 project and the word go, really. The West Coast Main Line was upgraded, and you know, there's no further upgrades were doable that were cheaper than building a greenfield new line. So that's why HS2 was chosen. If you switch West Coast Main Line for East Coast Main Line, I mean, the verdict of the IRP was that there weren't justified benefits of building the eastern leg that exceeded investing in the East Coast Main Line, where the upgrades are still possible, and then you don't get quite the outputs, but they are cheaper. So I mean, the big issue about the affordability of HS2, I think we should think of it in terms of opportunity costs. You know, if we spend more than we hope to do on HS2 and the integrated rail plan, we'll have to not spend on something else. You know? And that might be more important for economic development. So HS2 does have to be, or the IRP does have to be affordable.
Thanks. Did you have anything to add to that, Clive, or?
No, I think the opportunity cost is a really fair point. And to some extent, some of that work is being done, although it's not popular to start downsizing projects, but indeed that's really important.
Thanks for that. There was another question on sort of the impact of all of this on Southwest England, which is obviously not part of the levelling up agenda really, in the same way as the Midlands and the North, and whether there will be an impact if things are shifting from not just the Southeast, I suppose, but also the Southwest. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'd like to take that one because I think that's a really important question, and it asks big questions about what levelling up means. I mean, the thing about the levelling up agenda is it does talk about Southwest actually. It says levelling up about everywhere. I mean, the two things I would mention is I think it's what defines one part of a region's overall offer for businesses and residents is journey time to London. And so if the relative journey time is not much worse than what you're getting with so the HS2 is going to bring the north closer to London, but it's not going to put the southwest any further away. So in relative terms, it's about the same, and there'll be no competitive disadvantage to Bristol, say, which will end up still got about an hour and a half journey time to London. To be successful, I think this lifestyle offer is what it's all about, and the Southwest can offer things that make people want to go there and be there and make their lives there, talented people, and it's quality environment, So that's the kind of when the Southwest is working out what can I do, even though I'm not getting HS2, there's still loads and loads of things they can do to make themselves attractive to talented people. And so that's my kind of thought on that.
Thanks for that. Clive, did you have anything to add to that, or?
No, not particularly. I think that HS2 struggles obviously for the Southwest for geography reasons. So there's some real challenges beyond sort of supply chain impact and things like that, I think.
Yeah, no, it is quite interesting because I mean the levelling up, obviously it's not just the Midlands and the North, and there's often the arguments that even in the Southeast there are pockets of deprivation, obviously, and areas with skill shortages, etc. So it's not all the big ticket items, but there are questions there, as we discussed previously, also with the ecosystem idea. In terms of access, and this might be one more for you, Clive, there was a question about catering for cycle rail journeys.
Yes, certainly in terms of station design, there's station parking, but I imagine people might be thinking about taking their bike on the train. And I think from memory, I think the rolling stock spec for HS2 says something very vague, like there should be adequate cycle spaces or something on the train, which could mean nothing to load. So I think the jury's still out on what that will do, albeit I know from the station design, so at Curzon Street, I think there's secure parking for 250 bikes or something, but so there is some of that built into the station design. But again, that onward journey part, dumping loads
and the accessibility in different ways.
Exactly. So is really important and is being thought about, but the challenge, I think, is it's being thought about in the different areas that the HS2 goes through in different ways, because it becomes a combined authority. In our area, it becomes a West Midland combined authority issue, and that philosophy may therefore be different to somewhere else.
Richard, did you have anything to add to that, or is that kind of covered your thoughts on it as well?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, there's another question here that I find very interesting, which is asking about kind of confidence in the reliability of the network and how to manage it and kind of trust, which is partly, in some ways, I think may go back to questions around people's comfort with the railway after COVID. But I think actually there's a lot more than that, because yes, you've been trying to deliver in the past for capacity for that rush hour and everything else, but then whether it's at rush hour, whether it's for leisure travelers, if people don't trust that the network works the way it should and is reliable, then that will be problematic. And this person says, does it involve stakeholders? Who needs to be involved in that discussion and that sort of thing?
Yeah, and this is an ongoing challenge for railways, and I don't think it's going to go away anytime soon. To get, the railway as a system is a large, closely coupled system, which basically means as soon as one bit goes wrong, the whole thing falls apart. And many of our other transport systems don't work like that. So the potential for performance is always inherently there, basically. So there's some interesting things around what can be done around that, and it basically performance costs money, and when we haven't got lots of people travelling on trains, we've got less money to spend on performance. So that trade-off is very, very real. One of the things that I think we do in the UK, which if I say compare our railways to the Japanese railways, that we tend to make that problem even more difficult. We tend to make our systems very complex. So even if you just think about HS2 itself, the trains running beyond Crewe will go on to the West Coast Main Line. They have to be designed in all sorts of different ways to do that. They're interrunning with the West Coast Main Line as they go onto the network. So I'm doing simulations around the absorption capability of late trains onto HS2, for example, at the moment. All of that is really challenging, and a simple design that was a dedicated railway to Crewe and a cross-platform change onto a West Coast Mainline train would actually give you a much better performance, and is what you would do if you were in many places in the world. We tend to design lots of complexity into our railway systems, which then makes that complexity even more difficult, that close coupling even more difficult, which perpetuates problems. So I'm not sure I answered the question, but fundamentally, I think going forward, that you're quite right. The punctuality and performance of railways and pricing is going to be really, really key, particularly to those leisure travellers, because they don't have to travel by rail. Probably they're doing it by choice. The commuters into London fundamentally don't have a lot of choice. They move jobs if they don't want to travel on the train in that time in the morning. Where the leisure travellers can generally do other things. So actually, the focus on performance, the focus on passenger experience has got to be much higher.
Richard, did you have something to add to that? Because I mean, I would argue actually that we presumably want the leisure travelers, especially if we're going to lose a lot of commuters with people working from home partly and everything else, that you want those leisure travelers on the rail and you want to be giving them the service.
Yeah, for sure. And
as well, so as opposed to saying that they should get in a car. And I think actually just, there's also the issue of electrification of automobility, and then if people can go into London by car and park for free because they happen to have an electric car and get in through the low emission zone, etc., then it's even more important to get that reliability and that pricing right, isn't it?
Yeah, certainly, road travel has capacity constraints. However we drive there, it has capacity constraints. So hopefully public transport should win over that, albeit if the performance is that poor, and we're not in a good position at the moment, I don't think. We're running not a full service. So if I try and travel, pre-pandemic, I had a 20-minute service to London from Birmingham, but some of those trains are now removed. Before the pandemic, there were options to get more cheaper tickets to if you select less busy trains, etc. They've all disappeared. It's all full fare. So actually, at the moment, we're not doing an awful lot to make railways particularly attractive. So we're not in the best place at the moment, but hopefully that will change in the near future.
No, I've had similar experiences since I've started using the trains again. Richard, did you want to add to that?
I'll just be really quick. I mean, the big debate in was if you build new, you'll design out a lot of the reliability problems on the infrastructure side. So most of the railways are like if you look at Transpennine railways, they're 180 years old brick structures, tunnels, viaducts that were pretty badly neglected for 50 years, you know, and they need a complete, the Transpennine electrification is actually what they call total route modernization, where you fix all the infrastructure problems at once. And it takes a long time and it's very costly. And people would say, well, why not just build another greenfield railway? But the problem we've got in this country is you can't build the new line and then just shut down the old line. You've got to actually do you've got to fix the old line as well as build a new line. And if you can't afford to do both, which are you going to do? And I think what they've done for the Northern Parish Rail is they're going to build a second route from Manchester to Huddersfield, but within West Yorkshire, they're going to have a look at how to reorganise and sort the rail network so it delivers all the best. You know, you get the best mix of fixing the old and building new to get the deliverables you want. And the IRP is a bit of it's a question mark hangs over West Yorkshire at the moment, and at least to Sheffield. But hopefully, there'll better proposals than what was previously out there will emerge over the next few years. That's my hope and my belief.
Thanks for that. This is a question, and I don't know if it relates to your point, Richard, about the kind of relative journey time, where someone asks, is there a case for looking at a slower speed specification for the HS2 2B Eastern arm, which I assume you know what that means, because I have to say that goes to a slight level of detail that I'm not entirely comfortable with, but there we go.
Yeah, I'd like to, I spotted that question and I was hoping I'd have time to address it. I mean, this was very much part of the thinking behind the integrated rail plan. So the 2B Eastern arm is Birmingham to Leeds and York. And what the IRP is doing is saying that arm will be built as far as East Midlands Parkway, and then you go back onto the main line. And north of there, if you build it at a slower speed, you'll be able to get London to Leeds and Newcastle faster by upgrading the East Coast main line you've already got. So Newcastle to London via HS2 was only marginally faster than the East Coast main line now, and it was going to only be marginally, if you upgrade the East Coast main line, it's a better bet for Newcastle than going via Leeds and Birmingham interchange and so on. So the problem is that if you don't build that Eastern arm, how are you going to improve links between Sheffield, Leeds and Nottingham, which is terribly slow at the moment? And I think you're better off investing in doing something on the network you've got than building the greenfield route, because it's going to be unbelievably expensive through what are basically coal mining areas with millions of uncharted shafts and everything. So that was a bit of the network that I thought was going to go way over its expected construction cost and get into all kinds of engineering difficulties. Without being an expert, that was just my guess. And I think upgrading the East Coast main line is definitely going to be better value.
I can see Clive really wants to come in on this one as well.
I think you're right in terms of infrastructure costs. I think also, you know, Richard, at the beginning of your presentation, you had that nice sort of satellite image of the UK at night area. I'm not sure if people spotted it, but what it shows is a satellite image of England, and basically just the density of light gives you an indication of where the populations are, and through that corridor, we you know, if you compare that images at night with France with a network and its population densities, or with Japan, we don't really have the population densities through those areas. So it's a really expensive way of trying to do some of these transport corridors. So yeah, it depends what we want to spend our money on. It's again that opportunity cost issue really.
I wouldn't mind. I'll just say one more thing, right? So I did get a little bit involved in the plans for the East Midlands Parkway station on HS2, and one thing that always worried me was that it was going to kill off Nottingham city centre. And now you're going to have you know, you're going to have a HS2 services will go into Nottingham Midland Station in the middle of Nottingham. And I personally think that's better for Nottingham than the HS2 proposal, where you would have had, you know, you'd had to get a bus or a tram out to a Parkway station, which I always feel is not that popular with passengers and isn't a great, you know, if you want to build an office city around it, you're going to obviously damage the office market in the city centre you've already got.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I suppose it's more than if you feel that you've got the HS2 along the kind of western side and you've got the East Coast Main Line delivering similar speeds, then the question is the East-West link across to make that bigger agglomeration that actually, you know, unlike Birmingham, which, you know, can attract a lot, is big enough to attract a lot in itself, but is always going to be more of a second city. So it's not trying to combine with anything in quite the same way. It's yeah, it's trying to say how do you combine how many of the north east and northwestern cities. Yeah. I'm going to come back to Jack Shear's question in a sec, because I just want to get to this question about sort of rail related skills in the rail engineering industry. So the question is, do you get the sensation there's sufficient long-term investment in those skills, and how might it be affected by the size of the industry and how it compares to other countries in Europe? I think this is probably one for Clive, but kind of just along those lines, actually, during your talk, Clive, I was thinking that there's also the question of how transferable those skills are if you have trained them and you have invested in them, and whether there's jobs for those people here in the UK and particularly in the Midlands and the North, if HS2 is completed, and then what happens?
Indeed, and I think this is the challenge. I think in terms of the construction piece, then there's nothing that special about railway construction. I wouldn't say that. A room full of railway construction people, but you know, those jobs are quite transferable, albeit, and this is the problem we have in all these sorts of areas, is that, you know, the kinds of projects that people are going to work on are big government infrastructure projects, and actually having a pipeline of projects for these people to move from one project to the next is something that can actually be set at a government level and would have huge benefits, so that we don't train a load of people and then we don't need them 3 or 4 years later. In terms of the sort of supply chain piece of this, we have significant manufacturing capacity in rail. Interestingly, albeit not from companies that have their HQs here in the UK, but companies like Siemens. But Siemens have more digital signalling engineers in the UK than they have in Germany. Hitachi's head of rail, global head of rail, is in the UK, of course, Hitachi being a large Japanese company. Alstom, which has recently bought Bombardier, so a French company, again with significant factories. So that's why the export is important, and the export orders are important, because we have over capacity in that production, particularly of trains at the moment, but for broader systems as well. So we really need to make sure that export market grows over the next few years. In Derby, they're making Cairo monorail at the moment. But that's one of the first overseas projects for quite some time there, and sort of unfortunately, and I'm afraid it comes back to government again a bit. Unfortunately, people do buy trains because of their technical ability or because of their cost, but actually they also buy them because of loans being underwritten by the government. And in that Cairo monorail case, it's a deal whereby the British government are underwriting the Egyptian loan, but on the proviso that they are made in Derby. So there is a package of activity around that that's going to support those sustainability of those jobs, that is about technical aspects, but is also about finance and government sort of strategy in those areas. And the challenge is, if we don't keep those factories full, they will close, and we will lose the new people, and we will lose the people that were already employed in those areas. So this is really the key area for me, I think, in terms of is the sustainability bit of it.
Yeah,
The
'cause it's
current
more-
order
it's
book
more than other countries
isn't a
in
worry. It's the UK is not going to have enough rail and rolling stock orders and construction projects post 2033, 2034 to warrant the capability we have in country. Many European countries do very well at export, and one of the really interesting things about railways are there are many places in the world investing in railways. It's amazing the places in the world that are investing in railways. So there is a potential to do that export, but it comes as part of a sort of UK PLC package around government financing, about companies working together, that needs to be a bit more integrated than it is at the moment.
Right, yeah, and those sort of skills in that kind of manufacturing are presumably quite specialist as well. So you don't go from manufacturing things and doing kind of very technical work in rail to starting a new manufacturing company doing something else.
Yeah, there's a little bit of transferability, and in fairness, as we move to more digitalized manufacturing and digitalized design, then perhaps that makes it a bit more easier to do. And there is movement between Rolls-Royce in Derby and the what's now the Alstom plant, and has been for many years. But yes, and we need those highly skilled people to deliver these products, and we really don't want to lose them, because that really loses that competitive edge. But and just in general, with these big, large international companies like Siemens, it makes them very sticky to the UK in the fact that we have these capabilities here, and there is a market here, but the factory in Erlangen isn't going to close, but the facility here might. So we really need to make sure that we get that bit right.
Right. No, definitely. Going back to a slightly more sort of transport planning kind of oriented question. There's a question about what extent local transport provision, and we did touch on this earlier, encourages or discourages the use of rail more generally. So this was kind of touched on a little bit in terms of when we talked about ecosystems and when we talked about the cycling links and things like that. But do we have any kind of knowledge of specifically perhaps to the new HS2 stations or the kind of plans in transport for the north?
Can I pick up on that first in just a general sense, in the fact, just to, I think we've talked about all the components of this, but just really pulling it together. We've talked about there being a need for more leisure travellers, and with the fact that they are the people that are returning to rail. We've talked about the fact of where the boundary is for the system, and the boundary needs to be the broader area to make sure we get the transport links in, and that is sort of a changing landscape, whereby the traditional, I get on the train at Birmingham New Street, and I get off in London, I get on the tube, and then I get into the next place, is changing a bit, because actually the passengers are wanting something different. So this and just how we think about mobility in general really needs to think about the rail as a backbone, as the public transport backbone of a much broader mobility integrated transport policy, which it sort of is, but in practice it's a bit sporadic, and one of the problems with that is, as I said earlier, it's lots of the spend is actually then pulls down to local councils or combined authorities to decide how to do that, and it's not as joined up as you might like. So there's certainly a significant potential for improvement in that space, and at the engineering sort of technology delivery level, there isn't a lot of thinking in that space. So I think planners are thinking about this area, but actually in the reality of delivery of some of the projects, it's not thought about as much detail as you might hope.
Thanks. Richard,
I'll just add that, yeah, I mean, just a quick one. I was just thinking about, I mean, Jack's point is absolutely right. I mean, just thinking about Leeds, if I just think about Leeds famously is the largest city in Europe without a city rapid transit system. It lost out on it. Its plan for tram was cancelled when the government ran out of money on some occasion, and it's still without. It's only served by buses. And I guess, you know, the offer to West Yorkshire was: would you rather have a multi-billion-pound HS2 brand new HS2 terminus station with you know, high-speed link to it, or would you rather have a city region rapid transit system? And what the IRP says is that West Yorkshire will get a rapid transit system. So prior to that, it was like, let's build HS2 and then we'll sort out city region urban transport later. It's next in the queue. But over the course of the last decade, you know, a lot of places said, well, actually, I'd rather sort out my city region transport first and build a high-speed rail afterwards, you know, after we've dealt with that. And so the kind of moves for bus reform. So you've got government strongly encouraging cities to have bus franchising on the London model, which makes integrated ticketing a lot easier. And this specific offer to West Yorkshire to fund some kind of rapid transit might end up as a better use of the available resources than the HS2 station, you know. But obviously, you know, swings and roundabouts. So, but I completely agree with Jack. Really, and one more thing I do want to say: if you just envisage HS2 as a means of feeding London, then all you need to do as an HS2 station is 2 platforms and a big car park around it, a bit like Birmingham Interchange or East Midlands Parkway. If you say, actually, I want people to start their journey in London and finish it in these regional cities because that's where I'm doing my business, then you've got to have the stations. You can't build these parkway stations, you know, they don't really work. So the more you can play on rail strengths, which is high quality, fast right into the heart of the city, not getting stuck in the traffic jams on the road network, the better it is, I think. And the more way you want to make HS2 a two-way railway where people are starting and finishing journeys in each of the stations, not just going out in the morning, coming back at night and unparking their car.
No, definitely. And I think actually, yeah, it's a sort of good message to be wrapping up on, because we do need to wrap up really now. Did you have any further last thoughts, Richard, and then Clive?
I would, all I would just say is the Levelling Up white paper is, I mean, it supposedly sets an agenda for the next 10 years. There's so much in it, and it's such a big issue for our country that I would encourage everybody to read it and engage with it. And as I say, I wouldn't necessarily agree, you don't have to agree with all of it, and you certainly don't need to agree that the amount of resources devoted to it is sufficient. But just the concept that this is probably one of the big problems this country needs to engage with, and that there is, you know, a lot of thought out there on it, and it's a work in progress. And you know, don't just reject it out of hand, but have a look at it and engage with it constructively. I think that's the message I'd like to leave with people.
Thanks very much. Clive, would you?
Yeah, there's just a few things to really reiterate. I think is us ending up with thinking about all of this as a significant transport system, and really getting back to trying to understand what the requirements are for the system is going to end up with the right thing and the right solution. And I think during the HS2 project, we've gone through some phases where perhaps we didn't know what the requirements were initially, or it wasn't very clear. We're now probably in a phase where some of the requirements have fallen through, but there are others coming up. So as being really clear about why we're doing all this will then feed the designs of the broader transport system, which will make sure we deliver the outputs.
Thank you very much. And yeah, thank you to both our speakers. I think that was really interesting and engaging. We had some great questions. And the recording will be available, as I said before, on the TSU website and the TSU YouTube channel. And yeah, we hope that you join us at our next event, our next TSU seminar, which is actually going to be kind of next Oxford term. So we have a little bit of a gap there. But keep your eyes out for the notifications and kind of bulletins about it. Thank you very